I think that if you don't feel like you can offer anything else to your kid or to the children in your life, offering them access to stories is a cheap and easy way to build like a version of the world you want to see.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ambreia Meadows-Fernandez, the associate editor here at Kindred by Parents. And today I am speaking with Dr. Brittney Cooper. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Ambreia. You can call me Brittney.
Okay, what is your first memory of standing up?
I hadn't thought about it in quite that way, interestingly enough. But the memory I have is actually probably a little off the beaten path. What I most remember is being in the third grade and being about 8 years old and being called the N word for the very first time. And giving the white girl who did it the what for on the playground. It was all bobbing necks and, going off because that was the language that I had. That's what I observed the Black women in my life doing when they were like, you're not going to speak to me in this way. And so I remember both, telling her that I didn't think that it was cool for her to do this on the playground. And then I remembered the subsequent moment of going home and then saying to my mama, what does the N word mean? Because even though I'd heard it used colloquially, I hadn't ever heard it used with the vitriol that I saw my classmate using it with.
And so do you feel like that experience, that first initial memory of standing up had any shape on how you interacted with all of the other terms that are often thrown at Black women in Black communities, even when we don't really know how to react to them?
What kinds of terms do you mean?
For example, dog whistles, like calling us lazy, or those subtle comments that you can see people make. Technically, on the surface, someone can kind of like argue that it didn't mean anything or it wasn't racialized, but we know that the context is being offered to us. There's something else under the surface.
One of the things that I always try to hold in tension is that part of what it means to be a Black girl in the world when I was a Black girl and today is balancing the need to speak up for yourself, the need to represent your community really well, which means that you got to be able to read a room really well very early, right? When you're a Black kid, you have to have a level of vigilance to understand the subtext of things before other kids have to. My mama always said, don't be out here acting like you ain't got no sense. You always be somewhere acting like you have some sense. But I understood that it was about a kind of comportment. And I did very early have the sense that you're not going to pick on me. I'm excellent. I'm smart and I deserve to be here. Right. And so you're not going to talk to me any kind of way. And in particular, I didn't always have that kind of smoke for like Black girls because I wanted to be friends with them and I wasn't super cool. I was kind of awkward. So, it was harder. But anytime I perceived a kind of disrespect, particularly as a Black girl in predominantly white classrooms, then I had all the smoke for that. And I do think that I'm trying to write for all Black girls, all Black children, but certainly for Black kids that are experiencing that, the way that I kind of was buoyed to be able to stand up against that is, I didn't get a lot of like instruction about racial dynamics at home, but what I got was a very kind of pro-Black instruction, like here are books about Black people that you should know and you should be proud of.
So that, of course, feels like a perfect segue to your upcoming release. So I'd like you to tell me a little bit about Stand Up.
Look, I was a voracious reader as a kid, and one of my earliest kind of memories of my love of books is going to the Scholastic Book Fair. We all stand a Scholastic Book Fair, particularly if you're a person of a certain age. And so I remember bringing the flyer home and getting my little money, to buy the couple of books. It was mostly Babysitter's Club books. That's the thing that I loved. And so I think that I was being set on a path to like tell stories because I love stories. But the other thing that I remember is that my aunt my aunt lived in a big city. She lived in Dallas, which I lived in a small town. So she had access to a Black bookstore. So there was a time when she came in and she bought me all of these like Black books. There was a biography of Martin Luther King, a young adult biography. There was a paper doll book, and it's where I learned who Josephine Baker was in these beautiful dresses. So in the Martin Luther King biography, Rosa Parks was of course a central character to that story, and there were activities in the back of the book, and one of them was to put on a play. And I went to my fourth grade teacher and I said, "Hey, Miss Galton," she's one of the few black teachers I ever had, and I loved her and we had a great relationship. And I said to her, "Hey, can we put this play on?" And so she deputized me to do it. And so my white best friend was the director, and I was the producer, and we put on this kind of, this tale about, integration and the, Montgomery bus boycott, and I was also the star. I was Rosa Parks, and there is VHS footage of me playing Rosa Parks in the fourth grade class play. Um, However, so this is for me those sort of formative memories of books. Some certainly earlier than that, but where I learned, where I got this sense of what it meant to be a black girl in the world, that you had to stand up to people, you didn't let people push you around, and navigating this kind of world of whiteness and blackness and not knowing what it was all about. It was a lovely introduction and a lovely way to kind of find my footing. And it was in that spirit that I wrote Stand Up, is this kind of love letter to black girls who are figuring out what does it mean to have a voice. And one of the things that I really care about is like helping young people of all ages to recognize that we are actually not tasked in any generation with inventing the struggle. We are part of a long lineage of freedom fighters. And the sooner we learn that, I think it becomes easier for us to face some of the battles that we have ahead of us.
I think that is so, so beautiful. And so the next question that I have for you is, of course, as you've already said, we get to hear a lot of Black women and Black girls' stories within this book. And you have stories, I think there are 10.
Yes.
There are 10 profiles within the book, and one of them we discuss Mambet in way back in 1744, and then we go all the way to Mari Kopany, whose story is still unfolding. And so my question for you is, how did you decide, like with so much untold rich Black history, how did you decide which 10 to pick?
In my career as a women's studies professor, I write about all kinds of really dope Black women who made impacts on history. So I'm brimming over with stories about Black women all around. So there's some in the books that I write in my kind of day job. And these, I wanted them to span the scope of American history. So you get Black women and girls, you get both Mambet, who is an enslaved Black woman, and you get Phyllis Wheatley, an enslaved Black girl, before America is actually America. Because I want folks to understand that Black women and girls have been part of this freedom project. They've been helping to define it before there was ever a thing that we call the United States of America. And I wanted us to be able to look in every century. We're talking about the 18th century, we're talking about the 19th century, so we have Ida B. Wells, we're talking about the early part of the 20th century, right? And then we're talking about the 21st century. So I wanted to pick iconic women, folks whose stories inspired me because they did something that we'd never seen done before. I wanted there to be a mix of Black girls, so that folks didn't believe that the young people who read this didn't think that you have to be a grown person to stand up. What does it mean that Phyllis Wheatley is standing up at 8, is standing up at 14? What does it mean that Mari is standing up, as a little girl writing to the president saying, hey, you need to do something about the water? And again, it's that thing about the long Black freedom struggle. And so, look, my hope is that, this won't be my only opportunity to sort of talk about Black women who have stood up, but these were some names that I wanted in the arsenal. And the other thing I wanted is there are some familiar names. Like I love Ida B. Wells because she's just so crunk, she's just so unapologetic. And I love Phyllis Wheatley, and I just think that she is a name that everyone should know. And Rosa Parks, because Rosa Parks has been based since I was 9, and I just feel like, she should be in this book. But I also wanted there to be names that you might not ever learn about in a history class. You might not ever know that Prathia Hall helped Martin Luther King to find the words "I have a dream," or you might not ever hear about Leela Foley, right, the first Black woman to be a mayor of a town, right, in the U.S.
That is so much to digest. And one of the other questions that I have for you around that, and thinking about this idea of this lineage of Black freedom fighters, how did you decide that you wanted to focus in on I saw that we're looking at the ages 4 to 8, and that's so young, and that's such an important time. And I would love to hear about the intention behind that choice.
I'm an unapologetic Black feminist. I'm a Black feminist scholar. I'm like, we're trying to be free. And that means that we have to be free both when we think about racial struggle, but also when we think about gender struggle and all that comes along with it. And I want that conversation to start much earlier than in some ways it started for me. And so I see myself as bringing this kind of Black freedom project to all age groups. And so in my body of work, I literally write for every stage that I've made it to. So for adults, last year, some friends and I put out a book for young adults on feminism for YA, like Black and brown girls. Mm-hmm. One of the things I'm doing with Scholastic is a middle grade series for middle school age kids about 3 Black girls who are friends. And so this is my pitch to young folks, to the littles who are coming up and who are getting the language for this and who want to understand. And also, here is the thing. Young children are living in, particularly in these times, they are living in a world where they are seeing historic things happening on the grounds of race and gender. And we have an opportunity to have a real conversation with them that does not scare and shock and terrorize them, but it just says, hey, like, this is a long struggle. Here's some of the way that it started. And here's a way that you can be inspired by how we have overcome in the past. And I think that that's about like respecting young readers who are very observant. And who are feeling all of this with us and who are looking to adults to say, how are we going to fix all of this? And part of it is about inviting them into the story. And so this is why I wanted to talk to the young people in my life. I have little girls in my life. I have reading buddies who I read books with. My friends have children. I don't have children, but I'm the auntie that gets the call for us to do story time together. And so this is also my offering to those young folks in my life too.
How do you feel that Stand Up continues the pavement laid by so many of your other works?
Oh my goodness, I cannot believe you have my books. That means everything.
Yes.
Yeah, look, part of the work has been be in community with our people around the language that helps us to understand what freedom might look like for us and to understand the community of people that we get to fight alongside. And when I was doing movement work and, marching and protesting in the, as part of Black Lives Matter and all of our, protest upheaval we've had over the last 10 years, there were always little children there. They are taking this in. They are part of this conversation. And so I firmly believe that part of the way that you build multi-generational coalitions is that you talk to people like they have input and skin in the game and thoughts mm-hmm. about it. And that's true for little kids. I mean, the thing is, as I said to you, I already was experiencing racism as a really little girl, as a 3rd grader, and we know, for instance, that sometimes our kids are deal with harsher treatment, even at daycare, even at nursery school, and they're trying to understand, right? But I also, my white friends and colleagues who have children, I want them to grow up in a world where they see Black people as integral to their story, right? Not as tangential, not to the side, but at the center of the American story. And so Stand Up is just the next logical iteration of what I was doing in the Crunk Feminist Collection or in Beyond Respectability. Beyond Respectability is my love letter to the Black women who inspire me kind of day to day to be a feminist and a professor and an institution builder. And if, when folks read Stand Up, the kind of, it has a lyrical quality to it. It has a little bit of bounce to it and fun fun. And that's that kind of like crunk aesthetic that I grew up with in the 90s and 2000s in the Deep South, you know?
So it's like taking all of those elements that we got in these early books and kind of like synthesizing them into the storyline and into because the illustrations are beautiful.
Yes, Kathy Johnson is amazing. She's an amazing illustrator.
Just all of those, just all of the pieces. And I've been trying to sit here with the straight face as you were telling me stories about like your Scholastic Book Fair photos from books from your aunt and you loving Babysitter's Club. I was like, I know these things. And I had to like text, I had to text one of my friends and I was like, guess who I'm about to talk to? Remember when we read Eloquent Rage in the book club? And I had to flex.
Eloquent Rage came about because in many ways, given all of that, all of the struggle and all of the challenges, I didn't always have a language as a child to navigate that, right? And so as an adult, Eloquent Rage is me trying to figure out, okay, now that we've been through all of this, how do we make sense of it and build a world where Black women and girls get to live and thrive? And one of the things that I just firmly believe is like, but when we figure that out, why can't we start giving those gifts to our young people much earlier so that maybe they don't have to struggle so much? And one of the gifts is the ability to see yourself. And another of the gifts is to name for them, oh yeah, baby, it can be a struggle in these streets. But look at all of these amazing people who met struggle and who stood up in the face of it and who stood up creatively. Everybody didn't stand up the same way. Some people wrote, some people preached, some people walked, some people stood up like Ruby Bridges simply by facing down the mobs to go into school. And so it isn't about like carrying a picket sign. It is about the way that you choose to show up and resist any limits that somebody would put on you. And I think that is a really important lesson to learn as early as you possibly can.
Thinking about this idea of you saying like, you're that person, like you're that auntie figure and that loved one that folks can tap and be like, hey, let's do a book club. Let's listen and engage with the children in all of these different ways. I'm curious if you have any thoughts or words to offer loved ones who don't have children, but who are instrumental to a lot of children's stories.
I'm the auntie that builds libraries. That's what I do. So those are the gifts that I bring. I start, at the baby shower. And if I'm going to see the littles in my life, then I'm bringing books for us to read together. So it's kind of my signature. Now, I'm writing books. This book is dedicated to one of the littles in my life that I read books with. And I would just encourage people to see that as a way that you can connect, right? That is one of the tributes that I make in Eloquent Rage. My mom has 3 sisters and 2 of her sisters were avid readers. And one of my aunties, my Aunt Geraldine, is the one who took me to the bookstore all the time, And so I'm also modeling that's how I learned to love a used bookstore, because my aunt knew the one used bookstore in town. And that's how I got my like early copies of Judy Blume books and things like that, is going to the bookstore with Auntie. And so, yeah, like just show up and be that aunt, right? The kind of quirky one that wants to talk about ideas and what does the book say? And let's talk about these characters and what did you think of these pictures? And just last week, one of my close friends sent me like her 2-year-old is like, already memorizing text, not, can't read them yet, but knows what every page says, because she knows that I'm that auntie. And I'm like, stand up is coming and send me the video when baby girl, has memorized this book. Because I think that I think revolutions start, quite frankly, with what you're reading very often. And what I mean by that is, my mother was a single mother. I had a very modest upbringing. And the way that I was able to excel is that my mama read me a bedtime story every night. We lived in the projects. We didn't have much money. I had a parent who struggled with addiction. My father struggled with addiction. But every night my mother read me a bedtime story, and it changed the trajectory of my life in literal ways. I was an early reader, and that meant that because I did well in school, in a world where I might have been discounted as being kind of a poor Black girl, I was able to stand up and shine and stand out, right? And it forced teachers to notice me and to not be able to dismiss and discount me. And sometimes we come up with revolutions that are about fancy words and access and giving money, and people don't always have all of that. But what they can have access to is a local library card and a storybook and story time. And I think that if you don't feel like you can offer anything else to your kid or to the children in your life, offering them access to stories is a cheap and easy way to build like a version of the world you want to see.
Of course, we know, or if they don't know, they'll know now, that Stand Up comes out on August 2nd.
Yes.
So of course we want to hop up and check that out. Look, stand up and get to the bookstore. Stand up. And
That's like, come on. Hey, okay. Sorry.
But in addition to that information, is there anything else you want us to know?
This is the beginning of a few projects. So I'm hoping to be able to be in a relationship with your families and with the young people in your life. I want to be in community with all the Black folks at the table, right? So I want your young people reading Stand Up, your slightly older young people reading the Bees, which you'll see sometime next year, and on and on. That's what I'm hoping to do, is to be a multi-generational sort of offering for folks. So keep looking out, but enjoy this book. The pictures are amazing, but the stories, I hope, I want folks to be in touch and tell me which one resonated with you the most.
Is that a challenge?
Yes. Please tell me which person in this book, which woman or girl in this book inspired you to stand up the most.